For thousands of years, alchemists had attempted to create a legendary creature known as the homunculus. The belief was that under the right circumstances, miniature humanoid creatures could be grown. The means of achieving such a creation was left to all manner of substances and combinations, and many prominent alchemists, of course, claimed success. One of the earliest alchemists, Zosimos of Panopolis, described how an artificial man could be created by the use of dragon's bones, blood, and of course, the philosopher's stone. Later, in the 15th century, Swiss alchemist and physician Paracelsus would also claim to know the ideal combination for growing homunculi, with his essential ingredient being the arcanum of human blood. Even a Dr. Borel, royal physician to King Louis XVI of France, wrote that he had used distilled human blood for his homunculus, resulting in a bizarre creature that would emit red beams of light. Whatever the recipe, the homunculus was certainly believed to be an achievable alchemical practice. However, by the 18th century, alchemy had fallen into disrepute, and the introduction of modern empirical chemistry would leave the legend of the homunculus hidden in the dark corners of forgotten alchemist labs. But could there have been some kind of esoteric knowledge linked to this strange tale of creating miniature creatures? For creating artificial life? Join us tonight on Into the Portal for part 2 of the lore of the homunculus. Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the portal. My name's Andrew McKay.
And I'm Amber Ray. And we are coming at you with part 2 of episode 3, Lore of the Homunculus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're excited about this. We got an awesome interview coming up for you guys as well. Just to recap, the last part of episode 3, part 1, we discussed a little bit of different forms of esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
The idea of creating life from matter in non-typical or artificial ways.
Strange ways of creating life.
Indeed. As well, the idea of ancient cultures having different knowledge that perhaps we don't have access to at this particular moment.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me. That's something that we left off on that, but that really gets my juices flowing.
Yes. And as well, we did tantalize you guys with a few tidbits about Paracelsus. And and we mentioned that we were going to be bringing some more details regarding Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism as it relates to the homunculus and alchemy in general. So we're going to kick it off with a prominent alchemist that we didn't even touch on last time, and that would be the Count of Saint Germain.
Yeah, so, I mean, here's the thing. The Count of Saint Germain is this super mysterious character throughout history, and he deserves his own full episode, and there are podcasts out there that have full 1, 2, 3, 4
They've
parts
done an
on this
amazing
guy.
job, yes,
And Astonishing Legends is one of them. Go check it out if for more details specifically on the Count of Saint Germain. But we wanted to bring him up briefly because, you know, it's unclear whether or not he was a real person or not, but super interesting in terms of alchemy because this was a man who supposedly lived hundreds and hundreds of years. He achieved the Philosopher's Stone, or Elixir of Life.
It is reported that he did have, this Elixir of Life. Definitely described as a true Renaissance man and a genius of his time. Of prominent birth as well.
Yeah, so, I mean,
even though that is highly disputed, it isn't very clear as to what those origins are.
Yeah, so, I mean, as the story goes, he possibly could be one of the youngest son of the Transylvanian Prince Rákóczi II. It's up in the air. But yeah, the reason we wanted to bring up the Count, though, is because he isn't directly related to the stories of the homunculus, but definitely embedded into the world of alchemy. And we just thought that it definitely kind of lends a little bit more legitimacy to alchemy in general in terms of the prominent people that wrote about this guy or that had contact with Saint Germain, one of them being Voltaire, and who was a French writer, obviously.
Various kings and courts around Europe that he was involved with, including, the Holy Roman Empire. I believe he was Or was it Germany by that point? No,
well, I mean, he showed up in all kinds of places. He showed up.
did.
He appeared in the French court around 1748. He was employed by King Louis XV, I believe it was, in 1749, and he was involved in diplomatic missions and things like that. You know, around the same time, he wrote and performed symphonies in London, and you know, he was friends with Prince Charles of
seemingly inhuman
Yeah.
in the way that he had so much knowledge.
Yeah.
It's really, he retained boundless knowledge in all subjects, including alchemy. And it was reported that he could grow diamonds, or he could fix the imperfections in them.
Right.
As well, he is reported to, the elixir of life, as well as many other accomplishments. Definitely.
Yeah, like he showed up in, I can't remember exactly where it was. I think I mixed it up in my notes here. But he showed up somewhere in Europe when he supposedly was 88 years old, but he looked as if he was in his 20s, according to people at like this party that he showed up at, right? And this is just a reoccurring thing over and over. And so, yeah, this just ties directly into the idea of, ancient knowledge, esoteric knowledge. What could he have known that other people didn't, that was allowing him to live this long?
Very
or
strange.
Whatever, right? So,
then he did claim that he was immortal, hey?
Yeah.
And there was, or the other explanation where he experienced several rebirths throughout time, and that he was the embodiment of Francis Bacon, it's been rumored, as
that
well
was
as,
the one.
These are a few more outlandish claims that I've heard, but also Christopher Columbus, Merlin the Magician from the sort of tales of King Arthur.
Yeah, that's probably the most outlandish.
And it probably, actually no, because this next one is a little bit more.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, there's rumors that apparently he was Joseph, foster father of Jesus.
Stepfather.
Yeah, I'm not, I wouldn't really put any credibility with that, but it's definitely interesting, hey, how he seems to get around throughout history.
Yeah, very interesting. And the Francis Bacon connection, possibly, that some people, thought that he was Francis Bacon, that's sort of a connection to alchemy and the homunculus, in the sense that Francis Bacon, in terms of alchemy, he's known as sort of one of the fathers of empirical chemistry and father of science, for sure. Not alchemy per se, but he was willing to give alchemy a fair shot. And he was interested in, the physical, empirical aspects of alchemy in the same way that he would be interested in the empirical aspects of chemistry, but also in the metaphysical. So that ties into sort of like the Geihong, Eastern philosophies on alchemy and things like that. Spiritual even, ties to alchemy. Neoplatonism, definitely. So those are sort of some interesting connections to the world of alchemy. And he thought that there was legitimacy to a lot of it. Not necessarily the creation of the homunculus. I could not find any specifics from Francis Bacon, but it's kind of cool.
And either with Saint Germain in particular. He never claimed to have produced a homunculus. There isn't any accounts that claim that he had from other sources, but it is interesting because he does have all these connections, right, to alchemy, and then also to prominent secret organizations such as the Rosicrucians and as well Freemasons, which both we've talked about prominent alchemists in the first part of the episode, including Count Kufstein and Abe Geloni, which were rumored to be Freemasons, and Geloni himself, he was a Rosicrucian. But it's interesting because another one of the supposed, one of his incarnations, or whatever you want to call it, this guy Max Heindel, he was a Rosicrucian, and he wrote in the 18th century that the Count of Saint Germain was actually Christian Rosicrucians.
Really?
Which was the head of the Rosicrucian order.
Right.
Yeah, so another really strange one, eh?
Very. And of course, that's unconfirmed. But the possible connection is really interesting, because obviously these groups, the Freemasons and things like that, they're notoriously, it's sort of ubiquitous that people think that they hold, strange knowledge that people might that mainstream doesn't have access to. Well, it all
started in 1614, right, with that letter of the Rosy Cross, and they did claim to have a secret society, an anonymous society of highly intelligent and powerful members that did have this esoteric knowledge about the universe. Right. And so that's sort of been continued. Rosicrucianism to this day doesn't really flourish, but under Freemasonry, it does. Yeah. So if you apparently, and we will get into that a little bit with our interview with Travis J. Dow.
He talks about Rosicrucianism a little bit. And things
touches on it. He doesn't claim to be an expert in the subject, but very interesting what he has to say. So. Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we give a little bit more, because we left off with Paracelsus, so we can kind of kind of maybe recap a bit of that, because he was one of the main ones, and more recent alchemists and prominent alchemists that, you know, claimed to have a recipe for homunculi.
Mm-hmm.
And
he was really, like Travis will say in the interview, he was just a super pivotal figure.
Yeah.
There is a definitive pre and post Paracelsus time
very
in
much
history
so.
is how
Very
he
much
describes
so.
it.
Yeah.
So this is a guy that was considered an authority in science and medicine. So we can take him as, like, you know, a legitimate person that pursued these things that were credible. But then as well, he did go into these sort of mysterious fringe areas such as alchemy. And he did claim to have a few recipes for homunculi, which is very fascinating.
Super fascinating.
Yes.
So we reached out to Travis from the History of Alchemy podcast to get some more details on alchemy in general and the background and all this, and obviously on the homunculus. So let's get into that right now.
Let's do it.
How's it going, man? Thanks so much for being here to talk about the homunculus.
Yeah, it's a great topic.
So, I mean, like, Amber's going to kick it off. She's the one with some of the real gnarly questions for you, I think.
Yeah, I heard your guys' first part, so I know you did your homework, and I know I'm not going to shock you if probably the listeners. I mean, I hope your listeners heard the first part first, and now this part. So if you say things like putrid semen, no one's going to be like, clutch my pearls. No, like, that's where we're going tonight, right? Like, I think I heard your first part, like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to be able to shock you. Like, yeah, it's going to be a disgusting episode, and it's better to just, like, say that up front. I feel,
yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, we definitely came across some recipes that were sort of like.
Yeah, the first one was Paracelsus's recipe, I think, is what we came across. There were several, though. We were reading through Franz Hartmann's, like, Life and Teachings of Paracelsus.
Yeah.
And anyways, I just thought he was an interesting character to sort of, like, jump off the episode, or the interview with, I should say. Yeah, and just, like, what your take is on Paracelsus, and maybe just, like, how he contributed to these sort of alchemical notions of the homunculus, per se, or what your take on that would be.
Yeah. Paracelsus is also kind of one of my favorite figures in alchemy, and I didn't know a whole lot of. Honestly, I'd never really heard of him before I kind of researched alchemy, and I found out that you have kind of certain stages of alchemy, I guess, or eras of alchemy, I'd say. But there's definitely a pre-Paracelsus and post-Paracelsus. Like, he was that important. And even his name is, I don't know if you said his whole name or not, I don't remember, but it's like something like, something bombastic von Hohenheim. You know, like von Hohenheim, that's in Full Metal Alchemist, by the way. But it's like 10 names, and bombastic is literally in there. I'm not just like making up words. Bombastic is one of his names. And Paracelsus means, you know, better than, like, greater than Celsius. Like, he's, you know, the guy definitely had an ego, and he might have. So I guess the thing is that his ego was kind of deserved, because after him, everybody kind of looks at alchemy through Paracelsus's lens. Even if they say he was a quack and I hate Paracelsus and everything he said was BS or whatever, like, they still have to refer to him and mention him because he was that big of a figure. So he, So he was a big influence, I guess, in all kinds of things. But he also did digest some of the folklore, which is really important for this episode, you know. And he was the neat stuff was he was kind of the inspiration, because he was such an alchemical figure. He was kind of part of the inspiration for Goethe's Faust, you know, like the Faust story, and, you know, the whole deal with the devil, and, you know, that was very Paracelsus, and we did an episode on Paracelsus, and then it's weird, but, like, years later, I found out he might have been a hermaphrodite. Like, some of his ideas. So then when they excavated his remains, and they found out he had, like, really, really weirdly wide hips, and there was a couple of references that he wrote about. They were like, wait a minute, no, that's actually not normal genitalia, Paracelsus. Like, wait a minute, no, that's not. You know, and he was, like, totally asexual. He didn't. Yeah, he had just had zero sex drive, and you know, he's been analyzed over the years because, you know, he's one of the great minds of history.
Yeah.
And yeah, it turns out, like, yeah, there's it's not 100% for sure, but I wouldn't call that quackery. Like, there's good evidence that he might have been like hermaphroditic. And I mean, so, to kind of narrow it down for this episode, I would say, like, I thought it was interesting that he would take German myths and legends. So part of it is you take the classics like medicine. You take the classics like Galen and comment on Galen pro or against, like the Four Humors and all that great, that kind of medieval science. But he would also take, in that same vein, he would take a German myth of like the mandrake or the Alraun in like Austria and Middle High. It's a homunculus, but it's basically like a homunculus found in nature, kind of like there's a miniature person, kind of like the idea of an elf or, some mythological creature. But Paracelsus, think of that time, like 1600s, whenever he was alive. There was no Wikipedia or Mythbusters or Snopes. It's just like, if you heard of a story, you didn't want to sound naive and be like, I've never heard of that, or that's not true, and then find out, of course, it's true. Rhinoceros really do exist, So if you hear something like a mandrake, you don't just want to like say like, oh, that's crazy, that's quackery. Okay. So it's weird that Paracelsus, who did seem to have a head on his shoulders, did comment on all kinds of stuff. Including like how to make mandrakes, and just went right along with the kind of themes of the time.
Totally, and that's why we were drawn to him for sure. Just because he has so much legitimacy to him. Yep. And I mean, we find that with a lot of things in alchemy and in other stories too, where it's like there will be some weird story or weird recipe for something or whatever, but
or
it's linked.
A shadowy figure, and we can't actually find another source to back it up. Yeah. That happened a couple times with Arnauld de Villanova, and also Dr. Borel from King Louis XVI.
Do you want to ask him about Borel right now?
Oh, sure. We can dive right into that.
Let's get into that.
We were curious. Yeah. So we came across this guy. His name was Dr. Borel. I didn't actually come across a first name. Maybe further research would uncover that. But basically, he was in the court of King Louis XVI, the Sun King. And so 17th century.
Oh, okay.
So the story goes, he actually created a little homunculus that was able to shoot red beams of light, which is so stunning.
I'm not sure I've heard that. Yeah, I'm trying to think if we've ever even mentioned him, but I'm not sure we have.
I'm not sure
That's
if we have.
Crazy.
We've been leaning heavily on your website and podcast for this episode for these episodes. For
yeah,
sure.
Like not everything we've mentioned is on the website, but still, like that doesn't homunculus that shoots red beams of light doesn't ring a bell. Like I know. There was kind of a mythical aspect or like a magical aspect to him. Like, one thing that made him interesting for alchemists was even a dead one, I guess. Like you put him in I think it was like a glass coffin, and then you put it under your bed or something like that. And then the next morning there'd be a coin there, which is, creating gold from kind of like a leprechaun, really. Like now you're getting into that sort of spectrum of things. But alchemists were like, oh, that sounds like it's a philosopher's stone itself, Yeah. But yeah, definitely like magical kind. Well, I mean, the fact that they're in Harry Potter, it's a magical creature. Like that's the, but yeah, that really, so that goes way back by the, there's one thing I want to mention is I don't know if you mentioned it or not, was, the idea of the actual, so a root that looks like a human and screams very loudly, like loud enough to kill you, goes back at least to Josephus. We're talking like 70 AD, something like that. Like it's a 2,000-year-old myth from the Middle East that's like, it's not in the Bible or in the Torah or anything, but it is like of that era. Like it's that old. Like crazy. Ptolemaic, Greek, like Hellenistic world, like they called it a God, I had it written down somewhere. A bara, Baaras, baras, something like that. Like maybe don't quote me on exactly the pronunciation, but yeah, there's a plant like that. And then in the Middle Ages, sure enough, if you find a carrot or a Zuckerrübe, like a turnip, or a turnip that kind of has like arms or legs or looks like it's a shriveled person. They'd like stick little eyebrows on it, So you can actually find images of that online. Like I've seen those in museums in Germany that are like, it does look like a little shriveled corpse, and the detail is amazing. Like individual eyebrows, like individual hairs, and kind of like giving it some facial hair and kind of making it look like it, has eyes that are shut.
Yeah, well, we read that like sometimes like it's really hard to tell what was what back in the day because people would make fakes per se.
You guys have a Ripley's Believe It or Not up there,
Yeah.
It's
right.
it's kind of like actually, debunking it might spoil the fun. You're like, no, it really is a half alligator, half human. You're just like, I don't want it. If it is real, I don't want to know. Like, it's more fun this way. It's kind of, if it looked weird, it's just like, hey, it's a good conversation piece.
Exactly.
But apparently they could cost a fortune, like those little turnips with eyebrows could, set you back a year's salary or something, with the belief that you put it in a glass coffin and, you get a gold coin every morning. Like it's the, it's the goose that lays golden eggs kind of story. Like, yeah. So.
Yeah, well. I mean, these things were, like the things we've read, put them in a glass coffin, possibly get a gold coin.
The fortune tellers, they would spell wisdom. That was the Kufstein Geloni account. Yeah, that was fascinating. One other, I think another thing, just on this sort of note, whether it's real, unreal, whatever, it's some of the ingredients we came across.
Oh, right.
This was weird, man. We came like stardust, dragon's tears, bones, blood, that type of thing.
Things that we couldn't necessarily pin down to something.
Are they talking Komodo dragon here?
Yeah,
or are they talking...
No. Oh, okay. So the tears. Okay, boy. Yeah. Okay. Let me think about that.
Stardust, like a meteoroid.
So stardust. Wait a minute. So that. So I think it was even Paracelsus that sometimes called homunculus like gallows men or something. Like was it Paracelsus? There was definitely not just bodily fluids, but like specifically the bodily fluids that would leak out of someone right after they were hung. Like you lose control of everything, and that might be, or if there was blood from a decapitation, like that would you'd rush to below the scaffolds and gather that up, and that in turn would have special powers for a homunculus.
Is the arcanum of human blood? I came across that several times. The arcanum, and I'm like, what the hell is the arcanum of human blood? Like,
boy, that's a good question. Okay, so I'll have to admit, there's hundreds of people on this planet that have a better. So there's like Mercury or like philosophical Mercury, which. And there's hundreds of professors on the planet or authors that could have a better idea of like what that could mean, because they probably don't mean the element mercury like that, so tears is really interesting. Dragon's tears, I'm not sure, but tears could often mean like something like frankincense, because it was like tree sap, and it was really precious, and and it was had this really great smell, and it was used in like church rites. It's kind of like magical, mystical, and it looks like a tear if you get a big chunk of frankincense. Now, dragon's tear, like I don't want to tell you, but there's dragon's blood, which was something ground. Stardust use. Now I remember soul dust also is related to homunculi. A certain type, which was a basilisk, which is also in Harry Potter. So Abu Fala, I don't think he invented it, but Abu Fala definitely wrote down a recipe how to make a basilisk. And the purpose, so there's the ingredients were weird, which was your original question, but a lot of that was like bodily fluids. You start off with hair and you add semen and blood and everything, and you put that together, and then the first stage would be like some kind of snake, and then you let those grow. You'd bury it in like horse dung or something, and then you let that sit, and that would turn into a baby basilisk, and you got to kill it. Because if you look in through the straw, if there's a straw or something, if you look in, it'll turn you to stone, just like in the movie, Harry Potter. But you got to kill it, because the basilisk is just the first step, because what you're after is actually soul dust. Okay. Now, soul dust, that was one thing. And then also, so if you burned it, let's see, if you smash them and burn them and you got some kind of ashes, that might have been the soul dust. I don't remember. But it wasn't stardust, it was soul dust. And so first of all, so I couldn't tell you. So that's clearly like Abu Fala. I don't think he ever tried that in person, because I don't think he got anything resembling, living snake. I mean, that's just disgusting. But if he did, because he said something like, the sages say it's valuable. The sages say it has many uses, kind of thing. And what? He doesn't say what. He doesn't say like, okay, so this sounds like, oh, it's the tear of Newt and the frogs, whatever. And it sounds like some magical, like, okay, now he's going to get into some crazy witchcraft spell. Yeah. And he just stops there. He's like, okay, now you have your soul dust, and, put that in your inventory because it's awesome. And, go on. What the hell is soul dust? Like,
it's like IKEA instructions or something. It's like, what the hell are you even saying?
But I mean, that was, so alchemy is an interesting kind of thing where there was the purity of the ingredients going in, and then based on your process and like distilling and everything, the purity of it coming out. So it's just like, okay, there's normal, I don't know, there's normal mercury and there's philosophical mercury that has some special meaning, and it's technical. And it's hard. The thing is that if you say, oh, it's magical something, it's magical mercury, like their idea of magic is different than what we would think of,
Yeah.
So, because magic was just an everyday part of life. Like it totally wasn't strange, but they wouldn't say it. In fact, you'd get killed if you said it was magic, because, but they were totally superstitious and just kind of, there was mysticism everywhere and, this mythical kind of thing. So, then you add in like, there's only 4 elements. So, there's, you have, I think you mentioned, Al-Hayyan or Ibn Hayyan or something in the last one. And he was really big into like categorization and he was really like in a very modern science kind of thing. Like, I have this mineral compound and it does this and this, and it doesn't do, it has these attributes, and let's categorize it this way. And it's an early kind of periodic table or kind of, chemical classification. But honestly, he had no idea about elements or atoms or, so it's, I guess that's my long-winded way of saying I have no idea what stardust is. Like, or dragon's tears, like in that specific instance. Totally. Dragon could be part of the process, because they'd often, like you'd see an allegory, you'd see like the image of alchemical processes, or even like how to make a homunculus. It's like a lot of pictures. It's almost like a comic book, like IKEA instructions. And then it might be like, oh, the green dragon, and that might be like some chemical process of like binding or combination or mixing, and they call it the green dragon. And of course, every alchemist knows what that means. Yeah, and every non-alchemist just has no clue.
It's just this obscure phrasing at the time, or however they want it.
There are actually, which I wish I would have. I don't know if they started. This is kind of a new thing that I've heard about, is that there's definitely more so in Europe, like I think Netherlands or something. There's a couple of chemists out there that are doing like replicating experiments, and they're like, this is not total quackery. Like, somebody somewhere sat in a lab, and we know that from the equipment. Like, there's archaeological research. We know that there's mercury in a glass, and they're right now they're looking at weird compounds in a lab that they found minute amounts of in an alchemist lab. And so they know it's not like there were people in a lab and they were doing stuff, but well, with stardust and dragon's tears, what does that mean? But there's chemists that are kind of, reverse engineering it. Like, it's pretty cool. So, I love that. I mean, I love that stuff. Yeah.
What kind of stuff have you heard then? Like, what have they recreated that have you heard?
That's a good question. So I know one that I was really interested in was, like, because I know it's a real thing, was I love Isaac Newton. I love the whole idea of he's known as this physicist and calculus and, inventing gravity and all these ideas, like world-changing ideas. And yet he wrote more on alchemy than he wrote on everything else combined. Like, he was first and foremost an alchemist in a time where alchemy was basically dead and already kind of dangerous. Like, you could get in trouble with authorities, and definitely he could, because he was in the Royal Society and all that. But he talked about something called the peacock's tail, and So to go real basic terms in alchemy, you have like the white phase, the black phase, the red phase. It's like you burn everything to ashes, and then you get your elixir. You mix everything, let everything ferment for 40 days or whatever until it turns black, and then ashes are white, then it turns black, and then eventually red means gold. So eventually it kind of, or maybe you're after silver or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's this one phase that Isaac Newton he was very careful, and there was a lot of quacks, like charlatans at the time, pretending to be alchemists, and Isaac Newton had a reputation to keep, so he was very, very paranoid and careful about. But on the other hand, he was desperate to try to communicate with other alchemists and swap ideas. So his test was if an alchemist would say, I know what the peacock's tail is. In fact, I've gotten that far. That was Isaac Newton's line. He'd be like, oh, okay. Oh, he knows what he's talking about. I know what that is too. And so I'd be super curious. Professors, I'm pretty sure, modern chemists, they can get that far, and it's basically you let something bubble for a really long time. The typical sulfur and mercury and whatever, maybe lead kind of thing, and then for a really long time on a consistent heat, and eventually it kind of bubbles up into, if you have oil on water and it turns kind of rainbow. I imagine it just kind of suddenly it just shatters into this crazy, colorful thing, which Isaac Newton called the peacock's tail. And I'm like, I want to see that. I want to see that. And I think that's no mystery to chemists. They know that, they can get that far. That, because that's real chemistry. That's not, the next step is, and Isaac Newton never got to the next step, which is make gold. But they would have this idea of what it would take. And so, they I got really close because I followed I got to the colorful bit. So, next would have been it. But then, I couldn't keep the heat or whatever, some excuse, ran out of money,
I came across this really cool one. It was relatively recent. I think it was 2012. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was a guy by the name of Lawrence Principe, I think from Johns Hopkins University. And he recreated the philosopher's tree. So it was basically gold flakes in mercury. I don't know what else was added, and then same sort of idea, heated, put in a sand bath, and it actually legit grew like a piece of coral. It
sprouts, and and I think it was kind of. I love that kind of story because I think at some point he just saw it referenced too many times, from Middle East to Egypt, Middle East to whatever, and he's like, this has to be a thing. This has to be a thing. It's, the Arabic and Greek and Latin description all kind of describe, it is not like some, lost in translation crazy thing. That really looks like they're describing something they're looking at. And sure enough, I love that. That one I've seen, you can find pictures on Google and stuff, I'm curious. There was some professor I read about, University of Leiden or somewhere in Netherlands, I'm pretty sure. And he was, I just read about it. So I was like, okay. And, or maybe he just started. So it's kind of okay, now it's when it's getting interesting. And there was one the best alchemical lab preserved, with the most finds and the best preserved chemicals in the glasses and the best glassware, so they could kind of get an idea of what glass vessels they had. That was only discovered 2 or 3 years ago in Germany, and then the National Geographic did a thing on it, but I was like, that knowledge didn't exist when we started 5 years ago. So it's kind of it's kind of coming back. In Prague, we went down underground into a 16th century alchemist lab, they turned it into a museum now. They just discovered it 10 years ago.
So cool.
And Prague flooded, and then they were, kind of cleaning up the mess, and then there's another basement below the basement, and it had the furnace in it. So I got to see all that stuff from the 15 something or 1600s. And they even had it set up that, they have a bookshelf that opens into a staircase to go down into the, they did it upright, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. They put the alchemical symbols all back into, replicated them and stuff. So it's kind of, is kind of coming back. Like if you go to the Czech Republic, you can go see Alchemist Lab and stuff.
Oh, we plan on going to the Czech Republic and making a trip out there. We definitely got to do.
I'd recommend. I mean,
underground tours of Prague.
Yeah, if only you were still there doing tours, you could take us on.
Yep. I was a ghost tour guide there. I love it. I cannot recommend it enough. It's just amazing. So, yeah.
And
so I had another question I wanted to ask you. Like, we're still on track with Homunculus, but George, did you have one, Amber?
Oh, I don't know. I was just on the same note. Like, we're talking about modern sort of alchemy. And did you check out those videos we sent you? Like those weird, like YouTube ones where there was a Russian guy. He was attempting to create a homunculus.
I totally forgot to check those out. Yeah.
I don't know.
It's bizarre. I mean, it's obviously, it's not.
Yeah. I don't know how much I want to comment on. So I've seen similar things, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And like the chicken eggs. Have you seen that guy I can't remember his name now. He has his own channel and he was doing experiments using duck and chicken eggs and adding different things to them and incubating.
So, actually, the Russians were really interested in that. Like back in the turn of the century, the Russians were really interested in that kind of stuff. Like they were the first ones that were like amputating dogs' head and trying to, they all died. Like it's a horrible tragic story if you're an animal lover. But they were really into, trying to revive dead animals, like almost like Frankenstein type stuff that Europeans were doing, 100 years before that and kind of got over. Russians were into with modern science, like. Yeah, trying to put two heads on things, and it was kind of interesting that when everybody else kind of like was like, all right, that's weird,
backing off of it, and they're
let's go for it.
Yeah,
but it is funny to see like people like modern times like trying to recreate this, and it's kind of gross, but it's like super weird because the thing with me is like when I read these old recipes and we're looking at these ancient alchemists and stuff like that, some not so ancient, 17th century, whatever, but there's a lot of legitimacy to it, to what they're doing. And there's this idea that there's maybe was some esoteric knowledge that didn't filter through the centuries that maybe existed.
Right.
That people kind of, right.
There's a lot of people that actually do kind of believe that, like that think that the alchemists knew something that we now do not know. Like we've forgotten over the time.
What's your take on that?
I'm afraid to say, because holy crap, I've gotten a lot of, so I think that's 100% just total BS. Like that's just total crap. And the thing is, I want to be careful because I don't want to like smash people's creativity or, say like, hey, you know what, kids, Santa Claus ain't real. I don't want to be that guy, but honestly, there's just not a shred of evidence. And, there's just not. If you get into like not a single serious historian thinks these things. And if you get into like historiography of like what a primary source is and a secondary source is, you just realize like, oh my God, there's thousands of stories and there's thousands of secondary sources of eyewitness accounts of seeing something turn into something, and just zero primary sources because it just didn't happen. And there's just zero shred of actual evidence. And the way science works is you can replicate something in a lab, and that, it just goes against the foundation of scientific principle. And like, I'm sorry, but there's people, because you guys also mentioned like Rosicrucians, and so there's modern day people that would call themselves alchemists, and Rosicrucians might not call themselves alchemists, but you're not a Rosicrucian if you don't have a severe interest in alchemy. Now Rosicrucians might make the distinction and say like some sort of I don't know if they actually call it spiritual alchemy, but they might refer to some sort of like, oh, actually I'm trying to transmutate my soul into a more pure soul. And I don't want to criticize anybody's religious beliefs or that kind of thing. Like absolutely not. Totally. And I don't just because science can't prove something doesn't mean it's not there. Like I can't say that. But Rosicrucians it's like modern. They're just a branch of modern day. They used to be their own thing, I suppose. But they're just a modern day branch of Freemasons. And if you're a Freemason and you kind of show an interest in, so when I actually did my Rosicrucian episode, ironically, I had no idea about what I was talking about. Since then, I have like hundreds of Freemason followers on Twitter, and they've corrected me so many times that with authority I can say for sure that Rosicrucians are Freemasons, that if you're a Freemason and you show an interest in alchemy, then they point you to some of the Rosicrucian books, and they kind of, they point you in that direction, and they put you in touch with other people that like alchemy and that kind of thing. And there's definitely, so even the philosophy of like the Masonic philosophy of things, you're going to see a lot more alchemical symbolism and stuff in 2018. They exist today. They're, as I've found out. Hi guys, they're around.
What they would have to say on like that third letter, that was that 1616 letter of the Rosy Cross, and it was something to do with the chemical wedding of the. I remember the last. The
joining of
Right, so that could be interpreted as the creation of two homunculi, right? But maybe not. It's more of an analogy, or like I don't know. I definitely saw some conflicting accounts about that.
That's a good question. Boy, off the top of my head, I'd have to be careful what I said. But yeah, it's definitely, that's a good question. I mean, so the whoever wrote, those was it the three
letters,
original? Yeah. Was it even the same person that wrote the first three? I'm not sure. Maybe they're not sure, but supposedly yes. I mean, according to legend, yes. But they clearly were very adept at like alchemical language and concepts and all that kind of thing, which the alchemical concepts was. If you talk about, it's a chemical mixture. It's like hydrogen and oxygen, creates water. And it's just a normal chemical process that you would find in the chemistry textbooks. However, then you add some kind of mystical, you say, the king and the red king and the white queen and the, and the royal union. And you're just like, are you sure are we still talking about water? But
it's pretty. We didn't even know until relatively recently that we actually have like the alchemists, the Azoth like symbol thing. We have like a poster of it from.
Oh yeah.
I didn't even know what it was like until recently. It's pretty funny. Like,
now it's kind of like
episode reveal.
Now you kind of see references that you just didn't get before. You're like, oh hey, that symbol or that like rewatching Harry Potter. I'm like, oh. Nicholas Flamel. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
But
did you have what else did you have there?
Gosh, I don't know. That kind of wraps up for like formal like.
I mean, if you had to kind of like,
I wonder if I have any. Let me see. There is Homunculus and like Full Metal Alchemists and such. Like there is, the legend is still alive and kicking. It has to do with alchemy. There was another idea which, again, it's kind of weird, but the idea of like when they used to think about what was it called? So an animalculus,
animalcule thing. Yeah.
The theory of preformationism. Did you guys talk about that? Like everything.
We touched on it really briefly. Yeah.
Like all people are basically already fully formed as like within the semen, actually in their father's testicles, and then someone was like, wait a minute. Does that mean that then the grandchildren are in the semen of the semen? And and then, so there's a theory, so there's like, it's just, there's this ad absurdum, like fallacy is like, well, there's like all future generations are already fully formed all the way down. Like it just, so like the logic breaks down at some point, but that was debated.
Creationism and how like, it kind of makes sense from that standpoint if every human being was inside the sperm of Adam, say, at that point.
Because, so it's like destiny. It's like fate.
Oh, that actually makes sense, in a sense. Like,
Yep. Like,
I don't know how much
if they don't have a better, even science is like, well, we have a hypothesis, we have a theory, let's test it. And then when you have better evidence, something else comes along. And I like to say that alchemists were not stupid. No, they weren't even naive. Like we look at them and say, "Oh my God, that's really primitive," or that that's short-sighted.
Yeah.
But they really weren't.
Though, really.
They were super bright. They just had false premises, and but they did further science. I mean, that's a fact. I don't know about if you can talk about that in the Homunculus episode. That's maybe a hard sell. But alchemists in general created dyes and glassware, and
what we were trying to do. Like we were trying to kind of prop it up with some other alchemists. Like we talked about Gay Hong a little bit and some of the things that he kind of came up with way back in the day.
Yeah, he invented tin foil and into gunpowder and
Aristotle and try to legitimize that.
Tossed in some Play-Doh a little bit. Yeah.
Well, because actually that makes sense. Like the theories, when they were putting sperm between two plates and fermenting it for 40 days in cow dung, like they were going back to Aristotle. actually, so they were going off of empirical evidence, like you can't really blame them. You got meat, it rots, suddenly there's a fly. Well, where'd the fly come from? The fly spawns from rotten meat.
Spontaneous generation.
Putrid semen clearly creates tiny bees. I mean, like if you take a little bit of,
the hop, skip, and a jump, there you are.
Farmer plants something in the ground, and a couple months later, there's fully formed wheat with grains, and like that's transmutation in a way. You take almost nothing and you grow some. Their idea of the Philosopher's Stone was very similar to like Homunculus, which is like you grow it slowly over time. It was very much kind of like a living being. The idea of the furnace was a womb in many ways. So I it's kind of, I think people might get lost when you say homunculus. Like that's just this weird thing, and what did turnips have to do with that, or or mandrake roots? But really, it's that same idea of creating artificial. Period. Creating artificial life, creating artificial gold, creating even the elixir of life was one and the same. Kind of often, Philosopher's Stone and elixir of life, like. The elixir of life might be potable gold, which which is then you need the elixir of life, the Philosopher's Stone to create. So it's like it is literally the same thing. And then it's kind of like, so then it's not hard to understand that. Oh, okay. So if you're thinking of even both Chinese and Middle Eastern often thought of it as like medicinal. So then it's like not a leap and a skip to think like, okay, immortality, like elixir of life, but also medicinal, and then, okay, artificial life. I think it was Arnold of Villanova that said, I know how to do it, but I would not dare insult God like that. Like I would not dare also create life and, put myself on his equal footing. And so he's like, I'm too pious of a man to,
That's an easy way of not.
It's a good one. Yeah. Well, hey, there.
I read a story when I couldn't confirm from him was that he accidentally poured his elixir of life into a hollowed pumpkin, and that a homunculus grew out of it.
Oh, so that could be that he accidentally created them. Yeah, okay.
Accidentally.
Yeah.
Whoops.
It's like I did it that one time when I dropped some elixir of life, but I would never purposefully. Yeah. So I have done it, and I am capable, but I would never. Yeah.
Wouldn't dare.
I'm too humble to do it on command. Yeah, in front of the emperor. Right.
Well, anyway, I think that pretty much wraps up our questions that we had for you, Travis.
If you had anything else to add, or any little, I don't know.
Yeah, if you've got any extra little tidbits of wisdom.
Hold on, let me just see one thing. If there's a
sure.
Frankenstein's a great one, but that was more like bringing people back from the dead than creating artificial life. But there is that.
We actually do. We are going to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But
we already touched on our blog, actually.
Yeah,
there's that connection between artificial life and bringing people back from the dead. Like, can you do? Yeah, is it is it the same process?
Sure.
Yeah,
Definitely parallels. Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, thank you so much for being on the show, and if you're okay with it. We'd love to reach out to you again for some more alchemical knowledge. That would be fantastic.
Kooky ideas. I always love to tackle the weird ones. Yeah, obviously. No, I was kind of like you guys where when I started this one, I was like, homunculus, let me crack Wikipedia, see what's there. And then like 2 months later and 3 books later, I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is like 2,000 years of history. And, and it's,
we thought it was going to be a one part, like just one episode, and then just instantly turned into 2 parts. Cause we were like, oh my gosh, like there's way too much information on this to even like, it was,
and it's weird. And, at some point you're like, boy, I've never heard of any of this. Like, I bet nobody else has either. Like, this is great. So, that's a good one.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, are you guys going to try to create an artificial human now? Is that a?
She was joking about it. She was like, "Yeah, let's try to make a homunculus." And I was like, "Literally, if that's no, probably
we need
not."
We need a lot of horse manure.
Like I totally would if I had a horse, but sorry.
Yeah, that's the part that's holding us back is not having the horse. Yeah.
Well, yeah. All right. Wait, are you guys still recording?
We are still recording, but I'm just gonna we'll do a quick sign off here and then.
Okay, yeah. I'll tell you a story, but not on the record. So
okay. Okay.
All right. Well, that was super fun.
Totally.
Travis is definitely more knowledgeable than us.
Yeah, a great supplement to our sort of rudimentary knowledge.
Very much so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we kind of just, I mean, we take a cursory glance at a lot of these things, so it's nice to bring in an expert.
Indeed.
So yeah, I mean, what was your main takeaway from that?
Oh gosh, well, there were so many, really. I thought it was super fascinating, his sort of take on Paracelsus, and his influence on alchemy, and just the idea of, like we said before, a pre- and post-Paracelsus era.
Right.
Of pre-modern, whatever, chemistry, alchemy.
Yeah.
The idea also of him being a potential hermaphrodite.
Yeah, that was interesting.
That was really interesting. It just made me think that perhaps he would have had a completely different perspective on human biology and the limits of that. And perhaps maybe it just sort of allowed him to, I don't even know, be more...
Yeah, it definitely would have framed things differently in the world that he was existing in, for sure. Yeah. If indeed he was a hermaphrodite, he would have been... Yeah, because he was a scientist and an alchemist and doing all this research, you'd think that would have maybe been...
And all of the surgeries he performed, too. He obviously would have seen the biology and the physiology of the people he was working on.
So that just raised many, many more questions, possibly, in his pursuit of knowledge in alchemy and in science in general.
Yeah, so I thought that was really cool. What about you? What did you take away?
Well, I think my main takeaway was... it's kind of a pop in my balloon a little bit, but it's I have to tend to agree. The idea that esoteric knowledge, that ancient knowledge could have existed but not trickled through the millennia and through the centuries. How Travis thought that's, there's not a lot of legitimacy to that.
It's a lot of wishful thinking.
A lot of wishful thinking, and when you're in our line of research that, I'm always hoping for strange things to be true, but I have to tend to agree with Travis, especially in regards to the homunculus. But I still think that in other aspects of alchemy, and obviously some of the other things we'll get into, that, I mean, obviously not everything's explained, right? I do believe in esoteric knowledge, but I thought that was an interesting point he made in regards to the
Or
homunculus.
even if you want to go a level deeper, maybe not esoteric knowledge, but almost like not a secret phraseology, but not a code either, but he did kind of touch on that, right? The idea that there were terms that were known only to alchemists, and how, like, even some of these ingredients that we question him about, like the stardust and the soul dust and the dragon's tears, how those really could have been, like, he hypothesized perhaps dragon's tears could be frankincense, because it is resin from a tree, and it does have that sort of
shaped like a tear.
Yeah, which totally makes sense. But, like, maybe a lot of these sort of, like, more, I don't even know, like, just the phrases that we're not familiar with or we can't really explain, maybe they're just...
Yeah, like
terms for other things that we are familiar with at this point, but,
Well, that's sort of what we were thinking, right? Like, we were speculating on that a little bit, like, is dragon's teeth actually, like, literal kimono dragon teeth from the Far East that they're trading for or something weird like that? But, yeah, no, it's interesting. It's almost like a lot of this stuff is written as if it's, like, spells and things like that, for the purpose of keeping it sort of secretive, for sure. But I know, I thought that was interesting. And then the soul dust and the link to the story of...
the basilisk.
Yeah, that was really cool.
That was fascinating, because the way that he explained it, it almost was parallel to the creation of a homunculus.
Yeah.
Right? Because he described all the same elements, basically going into a vessel and then being buried underground. Yep. And then you wait for something to form, in this case, a baby snake.
Yeah.
And then from that...
How many Harry Potter connections are we going to have in this episode here?
And the mandrake? Like, that's awesome, man. Like,
yeah, that was cool, too, because, like, the idea that Paracelsus was obviously this scientist, and he was, he had a lot of legitimate experiments and stuff, but that he was also really fascinated with German mythology and the idea of the mandrake, and that is so similar to the homunculus in the sense that, like, it is this miniature, like the way that, and we've gardened before, like Travis talked about, like you'd pull out a carrot out of the ground, and
it's got turnip or something.
Yeah, and it's got arms and legs, and
you see rutabagas that kind of look like weird sort of like fetal type things in even the
people
supermarket.
would think that this is like, at the time, people would think that this is some strange version of that, and they would, that's kind of neat, right? Like they would doctor it up, put eyebrows and eyelashes and make things look like really, like actually like little creatures,
Little people.
People were kind of obsessed with that back in the day. But I mean, it makes sense in terms of like the animalcules too,
and within their framework,
right? Like the idea that like you start with a seed, you plant the seed, and you get you get something out of that, right?
You get the fully formed thing that already exists within
inside.
The seed.
So in some sense, it's almost like that's a very early, very rudimentary like understanding of DNA. Like they didn't understand it, but it's along those same lines. Like, you know, the DNA is inside of the seed or in sperm or whatever. And yeah, so this is kind of interesting.
Very
Definitely
interesting.
along the right track, sort of for understanding some of these things.
Getting there.
But
And that's really cool, right? Because even how he pointed to the Haiyan, that guy that we discussed in part 1. Can't remember his first name now. Anyways, then he had that classification system that kind of resembled an early periodic table.
Yeah.
But he was only working with 4 elements. So it's like that, to me, that encapsulates the whole effort, right? Because they're just working with not the same set of tools, right?
Yeah.
It's like, exactly. There you go.
Yeah, not the same set of tools. And I feel like, like this transitionary period that we're looking at for a lot of these alchemists, like the Paracelsus and things like that, you know, they're not, you know, they didn't exist 500 BC or whatever, like, right? But there's more baggage for like what they're doing, and there's more like
there's more consequence.
There's more consequence, and there's just
not
like
as open of a world. Like
it's a different world. So I mean, it's sort of interesting to
like
look
even his
at.
point about Isaac Newton, right?
Yeah.
How the lengths he had to go to just keep his involvement with alchemy
Keep
secret.
it low key.
Yeah,
Very fascinating though.
very cool.
So yeah, no,
High stakes.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, and it obviously fell into disrepute in the 18th century, and it's we've seen a resurgence of it though. I mean, Travis made that comment. I think after we stopped recording, just that like he has had people reach out to him on forums and say we know how to create this, or we've created this, and he's like, that's cool. How'd you do it? And of course, nobody ever says like, because it's a secret.
Yep, secret organization.
So
those darn Freemasons.
I know, right? Just post it on Instagram. Show us how. No, that interview was awesome, and it definitely contextualized a lot for me.
Definitely,
and it kind of.
Thank you, Travis.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Definitely grounded me on the idea that, probably not going to see any actual homunculus in our lifetime, but you never know.
You never know.
So, yeah, I mean, I got a few other thoughts here.
Yeah, well, we could just kind of wrap this up, having a concluding sort of discussion on our own theories and ideas about the homunculus.
Absolutely. So what are you thinking? We're coming down to the end of this part 2. Yeah. I mean, it's been a kind of an interesting ride here researching the homunculus.
It's been a roller coaster, that's for sure.
A little bit.
Definitely have gone down some paths I didn't expect with this.
Definitely.
But it's really cool. Like, I'm glad we decided to do this. It's definitely out of our, regular.
This is one of the weirder things that we've looked into, like not just for this show, but just in general. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the cool connections to this for me, I guess, is, I mean, just in general, the idea of creating artificial life. And we see that modern times in a whole bunch of different ways, right? Like with cloning and, like we're growing organs in petri dishes to replace people's dysfunctional ones, right?
Stem cell research. Even
So,
just growing hamburgers in petri dishes. We're growing organic, like, flesh and, like...
Yeah. And
out of nothing.
It's in the sense, it's like, it's kind of like spontaneous generation in the sense that, like, alchemists back in the day would look at something and see it as spontaneous generation.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. But I think even just to backtrack a tiny bit... Yeah. It's sort of interesting, obviously, like I said in the intro, 18th century alchemy starts to fall into disrepute. But then later in the 19th century... we start seeing these in popular culture. We've got books like Frankenstein, Dr. Moreau, things like that. And people are becoming a little bit disillusioned between, the church and, what they're seeing in the material world, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really interesting because, Frankenstein characters, I mean, obviously we did the blog post comparing the homunculus and Frankenstein.
The monstrous births.
If you guys haven't had a chance, you can go on the website, intotheportal.com, and check that out. But... yeah, it's interesting because it's the same idea, creating life from dead matter. Right. Basically. Yeah. And the fact that this was really rubbing people the wrong way. You know what I mean?
It's definitely, there is some parallels. You do need similar, similar solutions, I guess, like similar processes, I guess I would say. Yeah. Including, the idea of having a requirement of an organic solution, an incubator, and an energy source for both of these, right? With Frankenstein, it was electricity. With the homunculus, it was heat. And also, in some cases, Paracelsus describes this idea of having the right magnetization.
Yeah.
So again, that's an interesting little side note.
That makes me think, like, could it even tie into possibly, like, where you're trying to do these experiments? Like, where are they located in terms of, like, geomagnetic... we're getting into... we're going down the rabbit hole. But, like, you know, there's so many kind of ways you could, like, go into research and try to make arguments for any of this.
Yeah. But the idea of comparing the two, right, like Frankenstein and the homunculi, is very interesting because you do have these similar elements of conception.
Yeah.
But then you get completely divergent perceptions of the creatures as a result, right?
Yeah, definitely different.
One is revered, one is loathed and hated and feared, and rejected.
Right.
Well, the other one is sought after and want, like, you know, people strive to attain it. And it's been described by various people as the greatest happiness will bestow that of the creator of a homunculus.
Right, yeah. And of course they were used supposedly for predicting the future and for doing all these things. Or you would put them, like Travis said, like, put one in a glass coffin and put it in a special place, and the next morning you'll have a gold coin or whatever, right?
Very interesting.
And those are sort of the more folklore specific aspects of the story. But yeah, it's different. It's definitely contrasts Frankenstein in that sense. And then it also makes me think about, you know, the Dr. Moreau, like just the same era as Frankenstein, and the idea of, like, manipulating humans, right? The idea of creating something that wasn't something before, like taking an animal and vivisecting them into a human hybrid. Yeah. You know, and just bizarre. But people were so fascinated with this at the turn of the century. And
even with just automata in general, you know, like, you could almost, like, I wonder if people tried to create homunculi using mechanical parts and trying to pass it off as an organic thing. You know, like, even there was that famous case of the poker player, and he played, was it the King of France? It was some king somewhere, and he was just choked that this guy beat him at the game. But then it turned out that it was just a mechanical figure, and it was controlled by someone on the inside.
Interesting.
So, but he thought it was like a smart automata that could actually... Oh, no, it was chess. It wasn't poker. Sorry. Poker. What am I saying here? But yeah, no, all these things, right? Like artificially created life forms.
Yeah.
Androids, and even, like, just...
Yeah, it ties into modern times for that type of stuff too. Like, the idea, I mean, we've read books, I mean, we took a few classes on post-humanism and, like, the idea of, like, cyborgs and things like that. Like, this all kind of ties into that, sort of the idea of blending, you know...
Blending the natural with the unnatural.
Yeah.
And,
the real with the artificial.
The real,
that may be.
And that was a huge part of Frankenstein, right? Where he was rejected because he sort of crossed those lines, those boundaries between the natural and the unnatural, and the life and death, because he was made from grotesque, inanimate, dead corpses and things like that.
But it's also, I feel like it was just like obviously it's just a story. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just had a thought on my head. The idea that, like, even how Paracelsus, he would take... He called the homunculi that he made gallows men, because he took the death juices from the people and then used that to create new life. So in a sense, those are kind of equatable, right?
I would say so.
Anyways, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's interesting. Obviously, Frankenstein's just a story, but like, people feared him and comparatively to the homunculi, but it was also like this, you know, big, tall, ugly creature. Yeah. It's like if Dr. Frankenstein decided to just use, like, a quarter of the amount of dead parts and you ended up with, like, a 2-foot tall Frankenstein, maybe things wouldn't have been the same, right?
That would be even freer, though.
So it's like the physical perception is, like, different than the homunculi in that sense. It's like when you see something small, you think, like, fairy, pixie, things like that,
and harmless and controllable.
Yeah, controllable. Yeah, totally. So those are the fundamental differences for me there. But I mean, we also talked to Travis a little bit about, like, we brought up some modern alchemy stuff, like that Lawrence Principe from John Hopkins, the Philosopher's Tree, and he had obviously, like, taken a look at that, and you guys can see that on Google. You can check that out. But
we can include that in our show.
There's so many things, like, that have been taken from 17th century alchemy texts that have been recreated. Not homunculi, obviously, but, you know, more simple chemical reactions, or however you want to describe it. But I thought that was really interesting because obviously modern day, for the most part, alchemy is looked down on, same as it was in the 18th century, right? Yeah. But there's so many connections to other things. I mean, we touched on a little bit, I think in part one, on the idea of the golem and the Jewish golem and, you know, a creature created from clay. Yeah.
And that's very interesting, too, because to me, at least, the golem is created with a completely different purpose than that of the homunculus.
Right.
where the golem is more of a servant or a protector,
Yeah.
and the homunculus is sort of a giver of wisdom.
Right.
And
Yeah, golems I don't even think talk. Like,
No.
as far as the folklore goes for them, you put a message in their mouth,
right,
and they will carry out.
And it's in Hebrew, right?
Yeah, you write it in.
So that is another parallel, right? Because in the Kufstein and Geloni account of their homunculi, what they would do, especially with the two, in particular, the two spirits, the red spirit and the blue spirit, that weren't really formed into things, but they were just like these essences in the bottle. And what they would do is they would rap on the seal of the jar and speak in Hebrew. Some
Right.
Kabbalistic incantation, and then they would form into these faces, and
Right.
one was very angelic and the other was very demonic.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. The way
Very interesting. Yeah, and that obviously, it comes from that occult philosophy from the Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. And
Another
occult
parallel.
philosophy, esoteric knowledge linked to occult philosophy. It's all linked. It's all linked. It's super fascinating.
Everything's connected. Yeah.
So anyway, I guess we're going to wrap this up.
I guess so.
I think ultimately we're not going to attempt to create a homunculus.
Yeah, no.
But this has been a really fun researching this one, and
it has been.
I think we'll dip our toes
It's
into
been a trip.
It's been a trip.
For sure.
Definitely a trip.
Yeah.
But we'll dip our toes into the world of alchemy again.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. We got to collaborate with Travis.
Might be
again,
a
too.
slightly less disgusting aspect of alchemy, maybe. But like he said, too, there's been some alchemy labs, some of the oldest ones that have now been recently discovered in Germany and stuff like that. So who knows what is going to come out of any
that would
of
be
this
cool
research.
to cover.
Yeah,
we should look into that some
follow
more.
up on that for sure. Mm-hmm. So thanks so much for listening to part 2 of the lore of the homunculus on Into the Portal. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.